Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Raving Patients Podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Len Tao, and I hope you are doing well. Hope everything's going well with your practice. Hope all the positive reviews are flowing in and your practice is growing and you are looking to potentially bring a specialist into your practice. Myself, unfortunately, I like to refer things out, but I understand the other end of the spectrum, and I wanted to bring someone on who's going to tell you what the future of the multidisciplinary approach is for a dental practice, and why bringing a multi-specialty doctor or a multi-specialty specialist into your practice is going to be the best route for the future. So today's guest is someone I've actually known for quite some time. We actually met in person a few weeks ago at the Smiles and Sea conference. Please welcome to the Raving Patients Podcast, Darius Somekhian. Darius, and he's from Paradental. So Darius, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to sharing your knowledge with the audience and letting them know a little bit about what you do and what your company does for dentists all over the country. So Darius, let me read your bio so people know a little bit more about you. I'll have you kind of expand on it, tell them what you kind of do with Paradental, and then we will go over some of these speaking points that we want to get to. Okay? So Darius is the co-founder and CRO of Paradental, a hiring marketplace for dental specialists. He is a business development strategist who partners with traveling dental specialists to help grow their professional careers in dentistry, one dental practice at a time. His roots in the dental industry began at 18 years old, selling dental supplies and equipment from the trunk of his car. After growing his dental supply and equipment company to over $15 million in annual revenue, he exited to Benco Dental Supply and continued to work with them before starting Paradental. Darius has cultivated an incredible Rolodex of relations with the industry and a vault of industry knowledge. So Darius, for those that have not heard of Paradental, I know you changed names recently, you rebranded. So why don't you introduce Paradental, yourself, and what you do for the dental industry?
Thanks so much, Dr. Tao. We're delighted to be here. Paradental is a marketplace where practice owners come to use us as a resource in getting them matched up with a specialist and guiding them through the process and getting all the peripheries of knowing how to do the billing, getting the insurance credentialing handled, supplies, instruments, even staffing support. All done at zero cost to the practice owner because we get paid through the specialist's side. The model has been operating for about 6 years now. I started it, the first iteration of it was more like an agency. It's been shifting more towards a tech platform. We're about to release our member portal in the coming weeks, in June sometime. And
Gotcha.
Things have really... Yeah, things have been really growing for us in the past couple years. We've expanded to about 200 practices that we're servicing right now. We have over 1,200 specialists that are registered with us. The way it all really started was one of my really good friends from high school. He's a periodontist today who travels. He came up with the concept while I was working on the corporate side of dentistry, servicing my exit contract at Benco Dental. I was a sales rep back then. And Dr. Shervin Malaim is his name. Fast forward 2-3 years into us dabbling in the model as an agency, we ended up bringing on board his first cousin, who's a former DSO owner in Texas, who's our CEO now. And I handle all the customer relationship management type of activities, and he handles the day-to-day activities of it.
So the company rebranded. So it used to be called, if I remember correctly, Synergy Specialists, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you rebranded recently, and you are looking to grow what you do. So let's talk a little bit about why you think practices should consider the multi-specialty route. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Not that I don't think you have a really good concept. It makes a lot of sense to me. But, I have been practicing for 15 years. I have always been a good relationship with my periodontist, my oral surgeon, my endodontist, my orthodontist. And I have become, over the years, a restorative dentist. I do some Invisalign, I do cosmetic dentistry, I do bread and butter dentistry, general dentistry, implant dentistry, restorative dentistry. But I call myself a restorative dentist. So I refer out perio, I refer out some oral surgery. My associate does some. I don't do any endo anymore. My associate will do an endo here and there. I refer out all my implants. I do the restorations. So, I am of the point to send it out and, have my specialist do it, and then the patients return to me, and I do the restorative work that they need. So, and I think that's the concept that a lot of practices have, or the doctor does it himself, and they don't refer anything out. So why should practices consider this multi-specialty approach?
Well, I think the answer is a multi-answer approach, right? Because you have on one end the specialists who are available in the market pool. There's only a certain number of them graduating every year, and there's a number of them that are already established with their own private practices. But the future of this, with the cost of debt and how much it actually costs to build the practice after you graduate from a specialty program, makes it near impossible to just go and open up your own shop and build a referral base from outside GPs. It's the number of specialty practices that are going to be about in the next several years is going to be far few less than what was before in the past 10, 20 years. It's just becoming more and more difficult to open a private practice and be able to succumb to the amount of debt that you've inherited going through the program. The average oral surgeon comes out with about $1 million in debt. Granted, if they come out and they actually if they're working full time, they can pay that off real quick, but there's not that many opportunities that allow them to work full time other than teaming up with a GP practice a day or two a month. The cost of overhead is rising. The cost of real estate, inflation, everything is it's going to peaks above record highs. And it's making it more difficult for private practice owners on the specialist side to manage their business. And of course, I'm sure everybody will agree out there how staffing constraints is also an issue. When they travel, it's, they don't have any HR burden. Their gross pay is pretty much their net pay. They don't have much overhead. And they act as an independent contractors, so they're free to continue working at a location if they like to or not, as opposed to catering to the referral base, which sometimes can be a bit of a time management. On the second side, there's the patients. They are looking for convenience. Patients coming in, especially in today's world, they don't really feel like getting referred out as much as opposed to getting the specialty procedure done in a familiar setting. If it's the right specialist that's been coming in to the practice, of course. Now, not all parts of the country you're able to access the right specialist, or let alone any specialist, to come into your practice. And the nearest referral that you can send out to is an hour drive, of course, right? From the practice perspective as to why they should bring in specialty, it's multifaceted. Number one, it putting the patients first, of course, in the patient's care. When you have a specialist working with you in your own practice, chair side, it eliminates any communication barrier that you would have, as opposed to trying to coordinate conversations around a case on a phone call, right? I mean, the whole dental public basically shares cases with here, let me just email you the case or email you the CT sort of thing, and we'll figure it out, right? That makes a dentist's life more stressful, as opposed to let's say you had a surgical pros working with you 2 days a month. You can wait till he comes back the following day after the consult and go over the case with him, and you guys can make a playbook as to how the treatment plan is going to go and how you want to present treatment if it wasn't done, and so on and so forth. So co-diagnosing under one roof has its advantages. The second is when you're, let's say, referring out for an endo and they're going to the endodontist to get the root canal done on the 18th, patient's insurance gets charged. They're left with X amount for the restorative and all the other adjunct procedures that are needed, including cleanings and whatever for the rest of the year. Typically, because there's 2 points of contact between 2 office managers, this is not explained correctly to the patient, and that leaves room for them to be surprised why they were referred out and the endodontist was in network, and now they have to be a cash out of pocket for the restorative side of things. It opens up room for surprises, as opposed to having 1 point of contact where they can just control the communication with regards to the insurances and how things are being billed in that regard. Third, it's a guaranteed instant production booster. You can compare the super GP to the specialist, but you still won't end up with the amount of production that a specialist can produce in any given day in comparison to a general dentist doing the cases. Why? Because usually they're faster, but barring the speed, the insurances also pay more. In some cases, they pay double the amount of what you would get as a GP coming in. Those are some main points from the practice owner's perspective as to why they would want to bring in specialty. And fourth reason why I would say it creates a more foundational perspective to the practice owner in terms of what the patient sees, because when the patient comes in and sees that you have an oral surgeon, an endodontist, a periodontist, all written up on the front door with them being part of your practice, they have this mindset like, oh, this is a nice group that I'm walking into that's run by the dentist that I'm friends with, right? And that's key, I think. It's the patient's perception on that part. Fifth consideration. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I agree with you 100% on that. You don't know how many patients have come into my office. They get to trust me, and then when they need a certain procedure, I say I have to refer them out, and they kind of get bummed out. They kind of look deflated. So I think it's a really good idea to bring someone in the office. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is I do a lot of marketing, and some of that marketing has been for implant dentistry. And when someone comes in needing implants, I have to refer the patient to the oral surgeon and keep track of them, or else I paid for the marketing for the oral surgeon because I referred them. I didn't get them back into my own office. So having a specialist who can place implants will allow a practice to retain a lot of the income that they may have lost otherwise. So I think that's another really positive thing. I think a lot of practices, a lot of dentists, and I'm not one of them, came out of dental school with a lot of debt, and they had to learn how to do these procedures, rather than refer out, because they want to retain the income, like I said. So I think I think anybody who looks could look at various things in this scenario, and I think it's something that I think every dental practice owner should look at, depending on the nature of their practice. So why is the OwnerGP doing these specialty procedures? And I think I talked about some of them already, but obviously they're doing them rather than they're taking classes, they're taking CE, they're finding the patients in their office, they're doing the procedures. Why do you think that is?
Few reasons why. One reason is because if you look at a whole map of the country, and let's say you just put a dot next to every super GP practice owner that does his own implants, does his own molar endo, possibly even does his own full arch cases, and so on and so forth, those guys are more concentrated in the metro areas. Why? Because the level of competition has forced them to become more versatile in the procedures they have to offer. After the last recession in like 08, 09, there was a boom in the amount of implant courses and attendees taking, all these weekend warrior courses to learn how to place implants, because the amount of competition that was brewing up from fewer patients was rampant, right? That's one main consideration why the emergence of the super GP came about back then. There's a lot more available courses that are hands-on today than there were 10, 15 years ago as well. A lot of the management companies, like the DSOs out there, are also taking the direction where they're trying to teach their GPs either become super GPs or to refer in for specialty. In fact, a lot of the group practices, especially some of the famous ones that have several hundred locations, half of their business model is bringing in specialty. And if they don't bring in the specialty, They expect the super GP of the practice to be able to handle it. Dentistry has been very stressful in general. You hear it all the time how dentistry is one of the most stressful professions out there, and this and that, and it becomes less stressful when you have the right qualified team around you to be able to take some of the more difficult cases off of your hands, even if you're a super GP. Why? Because you're able to have a better lifestyle, taking that extra day off or spending it with your family instead of feeling like you have to work those 5-6 days a week. Otherwise, if you don't produce with your own two hands, you won't be able to cover your production goal for that week or that day.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So, talk to me what's involved with, a dentist is listening to this. They say, hey, I think it's a really good idea to, bring in a single specialist, whether it's endo, perio, oral surgery. What's involved with setting up a specialist using your system? And is it time consuming? How much work does the dentist have to do and the owner have to do with it? Tell me about that process.
Yeah. So the process, it involves a journey of, let's say, 50 items to checklist, which most of it falls under the office manager's umbrella. That first step is you got to find the right specialist. That can be cumbersome in itself, because most times general dentists, or practice owners, I should say, will go and post an ad on ZipRecruiter or Craigslist or what have you. And depending on their market, they may get one resume, no resumes, or an abundance of resumes, right? In the areas where they get an abundance of resumes, it's very difficult for them to choose the right specialist that's going to be a long-term fit. The cost of changing your specialist or losing your specialist is very high. So you want to make sure that you really hit it on the spot the first time with this, right? And in the areas where you don't have, we call them underserved areas, where there's just not that many specialists, you end up getting like no interviews or one interview coming in. Those sort of scenarios prove where you really you settle for the only option out there, and that's not a good approach, right? With Pear's model, we are true at being able to matchmake. Our matchmaking abilities are, I'd like to say, amazing. We've actually married off 3 of our surgeons before, jokes aside. Well, one of them was accidental, 2 of them were by design. And that's the first step, is to select the right specialist, right? And once you identify the right specialist, you got to meet with them. We always encourage them to have a phone conversation first, and then get the specialist to come over to your practice and actually meet in person. Give them a tour of the facility.
Is this like online dating? You're seeing a photo of the person and what their qualifications are, and they're looking in some type of, whether it's online or whether it's whether it's online or is it through a book? How are they seeing the candidates, I guess you could say?
Well, we interview the practice owner, and we already have the specialist registered in our database with an interview that we did prior. So we have an understanding of who they are, what they're looking for, and their clinical skills and willingness to drive, right? And availability, of course. And we put all these data points together, and we choose the best specialist that we think will be the longest fit. Of course, we have a second option, usually, and a third option, but we have a majority success rate with our first time matching, which we're very proud of. And so after you meet with the specialist, at the practice, there's like a meeting framework that we put together where we kind of like give them a little guideline as to what to talk about and what to review. Everything from the operatories left-handed, or they swivel mount, or they right-handed, to the insurance payer mix, and of course compensation, right? Once both sides agree that they want to work together, typically the specialist gives the practice owner 1 or 2 days, 30 to 60 days out in advance for a consult treatment day to get lined up. This way, when the specialist leaves the interview, the office manager can start offering some available days for the patients to come in as the practice owner is diagnosing the referrals to come in. the the optimal frequency or the most common frequency of how often the specialist comes into the practice is 1 day a month. The busier practices tend to bring in the specialist anywhere from 2 to 4 days a month, call it weekly. Once both parties agree to the general terms and the specialist offers the dates, we'll follow up to put together the contract, which is something that most practice owners, unfortunately, they don't do. It's usually a spit on the handshake type of deal, and that leads to all sorts of problems. In fact, I just got a call from one of our offices yesterday saying that she's getting audited by the EDD, and they're saying we want to classify the specialists as W-2s along with everybody.
So basically, everybody, just so you know, we due to technical difficulties, I had a power failure. We had a major storm come through Florida here, and I apologize. I'm not sure where we left off, Darius, but I think we were talking about the woman that had the EDD or ACC or whatever you had said. Reach out to her.
EDD, Employment Board.
Why don't you continue from there, and then we'll catch back up again.
Sure. So we were talking about the steps in what needs to be taken and how PAIR addresses each step in getting specialists onboarded to your practice. So the phase that we were at is the contract phase, which is it's critical because most practice owners, they just do a spit on the handshake deal and they say, all right, let's just get to work, right? We'll just do a 50-50 arrangement and you bring this, I supply this, and let's develop a long-term relationship. But
just so people know, because I don't think we talked about it yet, is talk about the financial arrangement between the owner doctor, the specialist, and yourself.
Oh, right. So the practice takes home 50% of the adjusted production. They pay the specialist through PAIR the greater of a per diem, which is pretty nominal, around like $1,000 to $1,500 a day, depending on the specialist, or the greater of 50%. So it's a 50-50 split. The specialist ends up taking 45%, PAIR takes 5%. And what's great about it is there's no upfront cost to the practice owner to want to go through us. And most specialists that travel are going to want to work on a 50-50 basis anyways, except by going through us, we're able to get them the right match, usually on the first go around. And we're here to kind of guide the process along and take a lot of the heavy lifting off the office manager's shoulder.
Okay. Now, talk about how you track those numbers, number one, because I know dentists are wondering, well, how do I know, so is there an honor system, or do you go into the practice management software? Do both people do their own reporting and you see if it matches up? Talk about that.
Yeah. So every PMS practice management system out there has a way to print out a adjusted production report with the date range for any provider, right? So as long as the fee schedules from each contracted rate is entered in correctly into the system, that should match the patients that came in with in-network insurance programs, right? Now, as far as the cash out of network stuff, yeah, that is pretty much on an honor system because theoretically a practice can say I collected $1,400 from the patient, but they actually charged out $1,800. It's also important to note that ortho sometimes works on a collections basis and it's more per diem based. Like we do offer orthodontists on a straight like per diem plus like a set bonus for each new case start that they convert from a consult, like figure between $100 to $200. And then pedo, just like I was saying, every deal can be unique depending on the specialist's desires and the practice owner's desires. But pedo, you see floating around the 40 to 50% range compensation, not always a 50-50. It's the surgical specialties that are usually on a 50-50 adjusted production split. And the cost of the implant fixture, the titanium fixture, along with the oral surgeon's DA, who's somebody that's trained and certified for airway management while the patient's under IV, those two costs are split 50-50. It's too much for one side to absorb, is the way we propose.
And does the specialist bring in their own supplies normally, or does the practice buy the supplies? Talk about that arrangement.
Yeah, so we have supplies, we have instruments, and we have equipment. And equipment can be broken down to large equipment like CBCT, cone beams, and like small equipment such as the surgeon's implant motor, right? The specialists will bring the small equipment and the specialty instruments. They typically bring three to five sets along with the handpiece attachments, implant kits, implant fixtures. Specialists will bring those items. The oral surgeons will bring the sedation equipment, and the supplies portion is covered by the practice. Depending on the specialty, that the investment into the supplies can be anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for perio, OS, and endo. Endo could be a little bit more since most endodontists like to use the Tulsa rotary system, and those files they tend to get pricey unless you buy them in bulk. And ortho works where the practice supplies. Ortho and pedo works where the practice supplies everything from A through Z. The oral surgeons will also bring their IV meds at their cost as well. And the practice shares on the sedation production that's charged out.
So someone who's listening to this, they're thinking about, you know what, hey, I refer all this stuff out. I really enjoy my relationship with my specialist. What makes a practice a good candidate for a multidisciplinary approach to treatment?
Well, if they're happy referring out for like a certain specialty case, you mean?
Yeah, well, like I said, how does the dentist realize if they say, well, I refer a lot out, but I really enjoy my relationship with my specialists? So, you know, one, how do you recommend them handling that? Two, what makes the practice a practice that really needs to go into interdisciplinary approach? I mean, if a practice is small, it may not pay. A bigger practice, it may pay. So, what are the ideal candidates? You know, characteristics about their practice that you see from your end?
Yeah. That's actually a great question. So, first of all, I don't suggest that they should sever their relationship with the specialist that they're referring out to, because there's a value to that specialist, and you don't want to break that relationship. There's going to be a time where your patient comes in and they're symptomatic in pain, and they just don't want to wait a couple weeks to, you know, have you do an open in-med and get them out of pain. If you push that topic too hard, the patient's going to think that you're too money hungry, right? So still having that outside referral endodontist, for example, is good. Whether you want to have a talk with them or not, it really depends on your relationship with that private practice specialist. If you're bringing on board a specialist, if you want to tell them up front or not. Some private practices, they don't track how many specialty cases they're getting from you. I get a lot of practices calling me up where I ask them, so what's your motivation in wanting to bring in specialty? And they tell me like flat out that they only get a Christmas basket every year for as a token of appreciation for the cases that are being sent out, and that sometimes reminds them as to like how much in cases they've actually sent the specialist, and like, you know, that's what kind of hits their pain point sometimes. There's not a system in place for a lot of private practice specialists to really do a good job managing their referral base. A lot of private practice specialists, you know, they try to take docs out to lunch, and the guy who they've been working with for years is the guy that they kind of stick with, and there's different degrees of how close that relationship is. And for the most part, I don't notice that it's a tight relationship with most of the practice owners. And as the practice owners that are selling today, who are, you know, over 55, they were either doing these specialty cases themselves the whole time, or they're referring it out to somebody they know really well. The new guy that's coming to buy the location really doesn't care too much about referring out those cases. I noticed those guys really wanting to start bringing in specialty. They start assessing all the metrics behind it, like how many cases was being referred out before I was there, and so on and so forth.
Gotcha. So give me a bird's eye view of what's going on across the country. You know, the patient access to care in some areas is troubling, and in other parts it's very saturated. And I know you said some of you, and also talk about where your key areas of growth are, where you're seeing the most number of specialists needing to be partnered with or paired with a general dentist.
Yeah. In the metro areas, like Los Angeles, for example, is very oversaturated. You put up an ad for an OS and you'll get at least like 10 resumes responding back to you. Mostly like a combination of, let's say, like 60-70% new grads to anybody that's been out for like 2 years associating at a private practice, all the way to like the middle-aged guy that is not that busy at his private practice and wants to do like a day a week outside his referral base, right? In other parts of the country, Texas, the model has really adopted well. It's been adopting well out there. Endo is by far the highest demand specialty across the country. 1 out of every 3 of our calls end up with the practice owner saying, first find out about endo, and then we'll move on to perio or OS. What we've been doing to address the challenge of supply and demand in that regard, because there's certainly far fewer endodontists available than there are practice owners wanting to bring in an endodontist in-house. There's many reasons why. We could probably get into that later, but the solution that we came up with for helping to address this supply and demand dilemma is we're trying to source what we call advanced GPs that are proficient in molar endo dentistry. And I'd say about half the time practice owners are amenable to a non-board certified or board eligible specialist coming in versus an advanced GP. That is an alternative. I mean, there's some parts of the country where it's extremely difficult to find an endodontist. Like there's a town, I think in Erie, it's called Erie, Pennsylvania. We had a practice call us up like 2 weeks ago, and they're like, yeah, we have one endodontist within an hour and a half driving distance, and the guy just announced he's retiring. And I just started like imagining how many patients have to end up getting their teeth extracted. They can't get a root canal done, right? Because the GPs in the area aren't going to touch the difficult cases, or they may try and then tell the patient, like, look, this is your other option, or you can drive like 2 hours away. In parts of the East Coast, such as like New Jersey and Philadelphia and New York, finding most specialists to travel is very challenging. Traffic also plays a major consideration in some of the metro areas. So even if there's like an abundance of specialists in Chicago, it's a perfect example where, the traffic can make a 60-mile driving distance for the specialist just unpalatable. So they decline a lot of opportunities, and they just wait as long as they can until they find someone that's 10 miles away. In parts of Georgia, along that southeast rim, along the U.S. border, there's all throughout Florida as well. There's been a huge need for specialty. In Florida, actually, I was reading this article from the ADA Health Policy Report. They're talking about how the ratio of general dentists and specialists to the population in a state-by-state format, they refer to Florida as having the highest ratio of underserved dentistry, including specialty, by a rate of 11 times greater than the second state, which I think was Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. One of the reasons why Florida really boomed was because when COVID broke out, the dental board put a moratorium on issuing new licenses. So the only specialists that were able to practice there with the massive population boom that hit, because everybody moved to Florida, right, was the guys who, A, were snowbirds that had licenses there that were flying back and forth all this time from the cold winter cities, and B, the guys that are currently practicing there. They lifted that recently, I heard. So, like, if you're a specialist out there, you're listening to this, me personally, if I had any choice of any state to live, barring where family's at and what have you, I would have gone to Florida at this point in my career, because you're able to have a lot of options in front of you.
It's funny you said that. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, and we've actually touched on this a number of times on the phone, is what have you been seeing with reviews for specialists getting into the GP's practice? If the specialist doesn't have the best reviews, are you seeing that as an impediment to actually letting the GP bring them on?
Absolutely. So at Pair, we screen the specialists out and we look out for their online reputation. That's very important because it's not so much as like a deal breaker for us as it is where we like to be transparent with the practice owner or the specialist, as a matter of fact, when we find them in office, right? It goes both ways. Where we tell them, like, okay, this is what the interview went like. This is what we found out about them. Here's what we think about them. Here's why we think it's a good match. And we like to be very transparent in what we find out, so they have good perspective as to the pros and cons from both sides of the fence. It is very important to have your online reputation on both sides, the practice owner and the specialist, to be very good, because the practice owner is worried. The guy who's got the 400 Yelp reviews or Google reviews or whatever that, like, keeps it pristine, that keeps him up at night. The one guy that writes that 2-star review, like, that really upsets them, right?
True.
On the specialist side, they don't really think about it most of the time, from what I've seen, unfortunately. Because what ends up happening is when you're traveling, unless you have a private practice, of course, right? When you're traveling, the only way you're going to get reviewed on an online reputation board like Yelp or Google Plus is if you get reviewed at that practice that you're working at, right? And you don't really monitor that because it's not your practice, sort of thing, right? So they don't put much attention and focus towards monitoring themselves as specialists.
Gotcha. No, that's a great answer. Thank you for giving your suggestions there. So before we kind of go into the Would You Rather part of the podcast, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Not related to Paradental, just information for the listeners. We'll give them your contact information, how they can reach out in a couple seconds. But anything else you wanted to cover during the podcast?
Yeah, just in general, if you're thinking about bringing in a specialist of some sort, consider us a resource. We're great at networking and finding you the right specialist to fit your practice on a long-term basis. And aside from that, we also help our practices with any staffing or general advice that they need as to who they can go to for any sort of projects that they have in mind for their practices. We primarily team up with private practices out there, single to 5 locations, although we do service a number of DSOs as well too, and we're happy to cater to them as well. But our model has tended to attract the solo practice guy that does anywhere from $500K to $1 million a year in production, has one associate, or even a little bit bigger than that.
Okay, well, we'll give you your contact information, how people can learn more about Pear in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to jump onto these Would You Rather part of the podcast, which I think is fun for listeners to learn a little bit about how you handle some of these things. So I've got some questions to ask you. We'll ask 10 questions. Just give the reason why, answering the reason why you picked that choice. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
So I shuffled the deck. The first question is, would you rather take cold showers for the rest of your life or never get more than 4 hours of sleep again?
I'd go with never get more than 4 hours of sleep again, only because I'm suffering through that right now.
Okay, there you go. How about, would you rather spend the night in a dirty dumpster, or a dirty porta potty? Not a very good choice there, but one of those choices.
Is the porta potty, was it used before I got in there?
It's dirty porta potty, yeah.
Oh, dirty. Then I that's a tough one. I think I'll go with the dumpster.
More room. There's more room in the dumpster. So,
yes.
would you rather work with dead people in a mortuary or work in the busiest ER trauma center in the world?
I'll go for the ER trauma center because at least I have a chance to save a life.
Okay, that's good. All right. Would you rather go into the past and meet your ancestors, or go into the future and meet your great-great-grandchildren?
I'm a little bit worried about the future, so I'm going to say go to the past.
Okay. Would you rather be able to talk with the animals or speak every foreign language?
Definitely talk with the animals.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. Would you rather have a rewind button or a pause button on your life?
I'll go with pause, only because it'll help me save more time to get more stuff done.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. Would you rather be stuck on a broken ski lift or a broken elevator?
I'm afraid of heights. I'll take the elevator.
I'm not a heights person either. All right. Would you rather appear as a guest on your favorite TV show or have lifetime backstage passes to any concert you attend?
I'm hoping I can achieve the first, so I'll go for the latter.
Okay. Would you rather, and this is a dental question, would you rather pull your tooth with a pair of pliers or brand yourself with a cattle prod?
Do I have to choose one? I'll go with the branding.
You rather brand yourself. Okay. And here's a funny one. Would you rather fart in an elevator full of strangers or belch loudly while giving an important presentation at work?
Probably the first.
You'd rather fart in an elevator. You can blame someone else. Hey, he did it. It wasn't me. Wasn't me. All right, two more, and then we'll finish up. Would you rather have deep dish pizza or thin crust pizza?
Oh, that's a tough one. I always get the thin crust from Domino's, but deep dish when I'm out and about.
Okay. And last but not least, and this is one I always ask everybody, would you rather never be able to use search engines again or never use smartphone apps again?
Search engines I would throw in, keep the apps.
Keep the apps, so you're dependent on your apps. So
I'm more dependent on the apps.
You're more dependent on the apps, exactly. So, Darius, thank you for participating in the Would You Rather part of the podcast. I think people know you a little bit better now. Why don't you let people know how to get in touch with you, how to find out more information about Paradental? If they're a specialist, let them know what they have to do. If they're a general dentist looking for a specialist, let them know what they have to do.
Yeah, if you're a practice owner, you can call us 213-805-6282. You can also reach out to us on our website. There's a chat button available, or you can just come in and schedule a call with us. Specialists, this is the same phone number. You can call or SMS us, 213-805-6282. My email address is darius@paradental.com, DARIUS@paradental.com. There on our website, there's two sections, one for practice owners and one for specialists. So whatever you're looking for, come join. After we have a call together, we'll email you over a registration link. And from there, we'll be able to build a profile in our system and get the magic to work.
Perfect. Well, Darius, thank you so much for joining us on the Raving Patients podcast today. I think you may have sparked some interest in the listeners about the potential to bring a specialist into the practice rather than referring out. So I'm curious to see what happens after this episode airs. Guys, thanks for joining us today. If you like the episode, please share it with your colleagues. If you think a colleague may be interested in bringing a specialist in, pass it along to them as well, as they may learn something, and vice versa. You know a traveling specialist who wants to get more jobs, pass it along to them as well. Don't forget to like our Facebook page, Raving Patients. The podcast comes out Fridays at 1 p.m. every week, so make sure you tune into the next episode. And remember, your reputation matters. Until the next episode, thanks, Darius, for joining me, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Dr. Tao.